My name's Kendall Curley, and I plan the Brown Bag Lecture Series. And I wanted to start just by inviting you all to help yourself to coffee and cookies and mention the sponsors of the Brown Bag and also our other adult programming series. Our sponsors are the Friends of the Fayetteville Public Library, Arcega's Espresso Cafe, who they have donated literally gallons of coffee these last few years. Also, KUAF is giving us airtime, interviewing people on air for the various programs. And finally, the Ozark Cooperative Warehouse donated the cookies. And today, Collier's Photography stepped in a pinch and loaned us a lens, so wanted to thank them for helping us out.
The lens, which I left at home.
Yeah, so good folks there. I also want to just tell you about a few things we have coming up that may interest you. Next Saturday, we have a lecture series, Seeing Nature in a New Way, led by Ann Pritchard. And Dr. Roy Rahm of Rahm Orchards is going to talk about Arkansas apple roots, a history of the great apple industry in northwest Arkansas, starting with its beginnings in 1820 through to recent years. So I think that will be a very interesting lecture with over 100 color slides. And that will be at 4 on April the 15th. And the next Brown Bag will be on Friday, May the 19th at noon, and it's Senior Travel Adventures. And Faye Alter, who's a local travel agent, is going to come and talk about the pros and cons of going someplace on your own or going with a tour, some very interesting themed tours that she's familiar with, safety tips, traveling with grandchildren, all sorts of things. I think that will be a real interesting lecture. And also, I just want to let you all know that I'm planning this summer to devote all my brown bags to gardening. So if you have something you'd like to hear more about, let me know. Today, Carl started out with just a wonderful lecture last fall on planning a landscape, where he just covered sort of the basic design principles that you want to keep in mind. And then we had State Forester Patty Irwin come and talk about selecting trees. And today, Carl's going to talk about shrubs for all seasons, those that give year-round interest in the garden. Carl, you all probably know Carl by now, but I'll just briefly mention that he was the director of the Old Westbury Gardens, and a private garden in Long Island, for 11 years, and wrote a weekly gardening column for the New York Times for 14 years. And we're very lucky to have had him retire here to our area, where he farms and sells some perennials and produce at the farmers market, which is starting up again. Please welcome Carl Totemeier.
Thank you very much. I had a little conversation with my cat this morning when she jumped up on my potting bench and lay down in the soil. And she said that she was going to go out and have a nice, juicy little mouse for lunch. I wished her well, and I hope that your lunch is, is just as tasty. She and I have conversations every once in a while. She loves to get on the potting bench right in your way. If I would really have been on top of this schedule, I probably would have had a nice handout. But it just happens that this is a real busy season. As Kendall said, farmers market's opening, and I will have to tell you that I just didn't get it done. But we will show you a number of plants in the slides that will give you an idea, I think, of what's out there that very often you just don't come across necessarily in the nursery and so forth. And if the customers don't demand it, don't know what is out there, in essence, then the nurseries are probably not going to handle it as such. And by the way, she mentioned that Dr. Roy Rome is going to give a presentation, and I think you will find that to be most interesting. He probably is the most knowledgeable person, not only about apples in the area, but also about the history of the whole apple industry in northwest Arkansas. So I certainly would urge you to go visit or to attend that lecture. Some of you were at the earlier lecture that Ken mentioned, and we mentioned at that point certain ways, and what are they? Well, foundation plantings. Many people have the wrong idea about foundation plantings today. Foundation plantings really emerged in the days of the tall Victorian houses that had foundations that were maybe 3 or 4 feet off up above the ground, with a big front porch with about 5 steps that went up the front, etc. And the foundation wasn't particularly attractive, so they planted big rows of Van Hoodii spirea that came up just about a foot above the bottom of the railing on it to hide the foundation. Most of the houses we have today, the foundations are not that unattractive. They really are a part of the house itself that is just as attractive as the rest of it. So that the reason for foundation planting today primarily is, in essence, to tie that building to the ground. So it doesn't look, you know, like it's a sore thumb sticking up there. With that in mind, the use of plants for foundations, basically at the corners, because this is where you need to sort of blend in with the property as such. The maximum height or the tallest plants go on the corners of the house, and then the secondary feature that you really want to draw their eyes to is the front door, the entrance as such, so that the secondary height goes there. You don't have to tie these 2 points or these extremes together, because you don't have to hide what's behind them in the house in this day and age. So that's basically what foundation plantings do. One other point I think to remind you of is that if you have a vertical line coming down to meet a horizontal line, you don't want to plant a vertical plant with that vertical line, because it just emphasizes the verticality, or whatever the word is of that. You want something that's mound shaped, that's more horizontal, and that provides a better transition, you see, from that vertical line at the corner of the house into the landscape. Other uses: shrubs for hedges, for screens, for dividing properties as such, so that that nosy old guy over there doesn't stick his nose out there when you're sunbathing in the backyard. You know, it gives you a little privacy. So uses such as that, edgings of beds, and many times these screens, these hedges, etc., also become backgrounds for plantings of perennials, annuals, etc., make an excellent background. So there are uses such as this for shrubs. Now, I didn't get to attend the session on trees, and I'm not too certain whether, did she cover flowering trees, the smaller trees too? Okay, I'm just going to run through a few pictures there which give you maybe a little more of an idea of what's available. Then we'll go into shrubs, discussing again how these various shrubs provide different attributes to the landscape, and in particular then can make them or create interest in other times of the year than spring and summer. If any of you are where you can't see with me here, and I probably would be better right here. I'll try not to step on it. We'll get underway. One of the things that's not terribly widely planted in this part of the country here in northwest Arkansas are the flowering crabapples, and yet they're one of the flowering trees that has more things to offer than many of the others. You not only get the lovely flowers in the spring, but you get fragrance, lovely fragrance. And you will get the fruits in the fall. And there is such a variety of these. This is one called Donald Wyman. It's sort of a mound form, a little more horizontal than it is upright. On the other hand, here's Van Esseltine, which really is an upright form. So you get forms such as that, contrasting forms. Actually, this is in the wrong place. This is a Kwanzan flowering cherry. However, I can use it to illustrate the point that I wanted to make, and that is that you have colors ranging from white through shades of pink to the sort of lavender reds in the flowering crabapples as well. And the foliage can range from green on to this purplish red foliage, so that crabapples shouldn't be overlooked as a flowering tree to plant in your landscape. Now, when you buy your apartment on Fifth Avenue in New York overlooking Central Park, and if you're up around 104th, 105th Street, and you look out your window, this is what you will see. And these are flowering crabapples. This was the old conservatory garden where there once was a big greenhouse, a big conservatory, right opposite where Andrew Carnegie had his townhouse at one time. This area was neglected for many years. It's been brought back in recent years to the point where you not only have these trees, but the areas off to the sides are planted with extensive perennial beds as well. Our native flowering dogwood, we tend to think of it in terms of its flowers in the spring. And you do have now pink and sort of a reddish or a deeper pink color, as well as the normal white. They are excellent for fall color if they're planted where they get quite a bit of sun during the season. The more shade they have, in other words, the less fall color they will have. Their fruits are very attractive. I have, however, seen, well, let's put it this way. One of the places where I worked, I was anxious to get out and take a picture just at the right stage, when the foliage was at its right stage in the fall, when the fruits were at their maximum color. And I went out one evening and I said, tomorrow is the day. And I went out with my camera, and in the meantime, the birds had completely stripped the fruits. So basically, you see, you're also talking about benefits to wildlife with many of these things, as well as, you know, the things that to do for you in your garden. Unfortunately, the native dogwood back east has a number of disease problems that are all sort of focusing together on them. In some areas, they're not recommended they be planted anymore. The replacement, in essence, is the Kusa dogwood that you see here from China, Korea, etc. Flowers about 2 weeks later. Instead of the rounded or blunt petals on them, they have the pointed petals. A professor at Rutgers University has successfully hybridized these two species, some of which resemble this Kusa parent, but some that resemble the native dogwood. And these all turn out to be, at least at this point, resistant to the disease problem. Therefore, you know, this is one hopeful thing. Maybe the disease will not spread this far west. In essence, diseases and insects spread from east to west rather slowly. Why? Because the prevailing winds are in the other direction, and they have to move against the winds. However, with the situation today where people travel a lot, where they have campers and so forth, why these things are getting around much more rapidly than they used to. But the Kusa flowers about 2 weeks later. Planting landscapes, the native dogwood flowers with the early flowering azaleas. Combine the two. This one flowers with the big broad-leafed rhododendrons. So it can be combined with them. And they have fruits too. They look like red raspberries. Taste like custard. Birds don't get them all. And it has a lovely fall color, but here's another attribute that you don't get in the native dogwood, this exfoliating mottled bark. So all is not lost. We hope we don't lose the native dogwood, but there is another one which will take its place. This is Carolina's silver bell. This happens to be the largest tree in the state of Ohio. It's native in the Appalachian region area and is covered with these 1-inch long little white bells. Really a very nice native tree that I have not seen them planted here. I'm sure there's some around Fayetteville, but it would be suitable here. Think in terms of the Japanese maples and the fact that not only do they do all the other things that you plant Japanese maples for, but they all have excellent fall color. Doesn't make any difference which one it is. And this one, Sangu Kaku, has red twigs that stand out in the winter. Best planted in front of evergreen, so that you have something that stops the eye. Here's a Japanese maple in the Missouri Botanical Garden. This is one of the weeping forms. They grow very slowly. This is probably, I suspect, a 30-year-old tree as such, but judging from the hostas, you see that it's probably not much more than about 5 feet tall. So, okay, let's say 40 years, let's say 125 years, and you get inside and take a photograph of those picturesque, tortuous branches as such. Think of what this can do in the winter landscape. Heritage birch, we're familiar with that. There are a lot of them planted around here. We won't dwell on it. How about, however, the lacebark pine, Pinus bungiana? Pinus bungiana, lacebark pine. I bet you won't find many of them in the nurseries around here, and yet the thing is native to Arizona. I mean, it's going to live here if it lives in Arizona. They should be handling them. This is at the PepsiCo International Headquarters up north of New York City. This is the so-called lacebark elm, Almus parvifolia, with its exfoliating bark. So in other words, we can plant trees for bark as well. And how many of you are familiar with the Kleenex tree? Okay. Where did you live? In California, someplace?
I have one here.
You have one, okay. The dove tree, really. This is Davidia involucrata. Davidia, named after David, who was it was his last name. He was a Catholic priest who botanized in China. And this was brought back, I think, by Ernest Wilson. But when these things flower, it almost looks as if you had Kleenex fastened in the tree. And, you know, we should be planting more of these things. Japanese silver bell. Again, about 1-inch little bells hanging down. There's a pink flowered form. Flowers after the cornuscusa. So it's, you're beginning to get mid-spring, you see. I think there's one in the square. I think Susan left one of them there. But really a very lovely tree. The golden rain tree. This is an old specimen at the New York Botanical Garden, sort of crowded in with other things, but there are quite a lot of these around in this particular area. There are some strains, however, that will flower as late as September. In fact, one is called September Morn or some such thing as that. So there are a wide range of these things available. We're all familiar with the Magnolia grandiflora, the southern magnolia. However, this is Magnolia virginiana, a bit hardier, smaller, usually evergreen. Sometimes in a severe winter it will lose its leaves. But if you stick your nose in the middle of that one, you will smell the loveliest citrus fragrance that you've ever smelled. The National Arboretum in Washington, D.C. has hybridized the two. And what they are hoping will happen is that you get a southern magnolia in appearance, but one which will be hardier much further north in the southern magnolias today. I have some of the hybrids, and they are beginning to flower. But a very lovely small tree. That's quite small. Remember the old song about the rooster crowing around Sourwood Mountain? Well, there's a sourwood. Okay. Oxydendrum. Sometimes called lily of the valley tree, because if you look at, we'll show you in a minute, at those inflorescences, which are dried at this point, they kind of look like upside down or downside up lily of the valley. But fall color that's out of this world. And here are the blossoms on it. It's a member of the same group as the azaleas and rhododendrons, acid lover. You would have to, in other words, don't plant them where you've got alkaline soil. But they should work in many areas around here. And when you put it all together, this is kind of the thing that you really would like to see, the Kwanzaa cherries with the matching tulips and pansies in front. This is one of the old entrances to the New York Botanical Garden. There is a group, probably should say there are several species of this particular tree. They are first cousins of the camellia. I don't want to forget you people over here. I've got a post sort of in the way, and I forget to turn around. But it's a cousin of the camellia. There are several species from Western Asia, and they flower in July and August. With these flowers, they're like a single camellia. Stewartias. And they all have attractive exfoliating bark or mottled bark with shades of tan and white and that sort of thing. And not only that, but there is a cousin of them that has a similar flower called the Franklinia, which was discovered by the first American botanist, John Bartram, along the coast of Georgia. And 30 years later, all of them in the wild disappeared, and the only ones we have today were the descendants of the ones collected by Bartram. Franklinia, named after Benjamin Franklin, his compatriot. Now, shrubs. You can have shrubs flowering 12 months of the year. This is the so-called Chinese witch hazel at the New York Botanical Garden, flowering in February. Now, we have one of the natives that will begin to flower in October and will keep those flowers into the winter. So if you have these two species of witch hazels that in effect bump into each other, that completes the 12 months, and then you go on from there. There's a fragrant honeysuckle, for example, that flowers soon on the heels of this. There's another one called winter sweet, which is Chimonanthus, that has flowers similar to this plant that you see there that will be flowering in the middle of the winter. So basically, we can literally have things in flower. Now, this one coming to bloom in February in the New York area, and very often there'll be snow on the ground, but you'll get a day when the temperature rises above 50 degrees. Okay, you're walking through an arboretum or a botanical garden someplace. Suddenly you smell this lovely fragrance, kind of a little spicy, etc. And you look around to see where that woman with that lovely perfume is. Well, it's this witch hazel, and all it takes is one little sprig in a vase in the corner of your room, and it will literally fill the entire house with this fragrance. Not a heavy fragrance, not something that you're going to get tired of as such, but just a delightful sort of spicy fragrance. Forsythia on the left. Forsythia is a kind of a brash thing. You know, it's almost gauche, gaudy. I used to have boards of directors back east. The gauche was one of their favorite words. I probably hadn't heard of it when I left the Iowa farm. But anyway. But what about the one in the center? Coralopsis, winter hazel. Flowers at the same time and has that soft character, you see, that will go with anything. Just think of that being underplanted with spring bulbs of all sorts that would flower at the same time. This is an area being renovated, and there didn't happen to be any spring bulbs there. And this is what the flowers look like up close. Why aren't we planting Coralopsis instead of some of those doggone forsythias? Caria, and this lady over here reminded me of Caria earlier when we were talking before we started. This is the double form. This is in Atlanta, Georgia, in front of a historic cabin. One of the nice things about this is that the twigs on this have a bright, really bright, shiny green winter color. So, you know, some plants stand out for their red winter color in the winter and so forth. This one stands out because everything else is brown or whatever, and this one is bright, shiny green. Caria japonica. The azaleas, and you know, we have to kind of take care of azaleas here. It's the hot summers and dry summers that really are the problem. Some places you may have to change the soil to acidify it a little more, etc. But in the right place, azaleas will do well. But we tend to plant pretty much the same things. This is the Korean azalea. It's actually a deciduous azalea. That's the earliest thing to flower. It will flower. Actually, it will flower with forsythia and with these other things, and think in terms of yellow in combination with this. This is a select form called Cornell pink. There is one, however, or the natural form, which is a little more mauvish. And actually, the mauvish one sort of probably goes better with the forsythia and so forth than this one. But very early, Korean azalea. This is the royal azalea, azalea or rhododendron schlippenbachii. You got that? Write it down quick. I may forget it. This one will get to be 10 feet or so tall. Actually, what's the difference between a shrub and a tree? Where does one stop and the other start? Usually it's about 12 feet. In other words, up to 12 feet, when you approach it, you're talking about a large shrub or a small tree, depending on how you look at it. And very often we tend to train trees to a select number of trunks. Maybe it's one, or maybe it's like 3 trunks, etc. Well, shrubs you usually let pretty well do their own thing as far as the number of trunks. But this one will flower. In fact, you look back against that little cabin there, the little cottage, and you will see tulips in flower, so it's flowering with the tulips. There's a white-flowered form of this one as well. And this is more typically what we plant. This is in Callaway Gardens in Pine Mountain, Georgia. And these are probably kurumis, I suspect. But the thing that Callaway Gardens is most known for is that their horticultural director for many years was the expert in the country on native azaleas. Whoops, I'm pressing the wrong button. And there are some native azaleas down in the Ouachita Mountain areas, down along the streams, etc. And there are many of them that come from the Appalachian regions, and they range from these lovely white ones with the little pinkish markings, some of which are just have the loveliest spicy fragrance, to reds and oranges and yellows. And how many of you are familiar with the Exberry or the Knapp Hill? Okay. Yeah, Exberries came from the Rothschilds in England, where on their estate they bred them. And what did they use for the breeding stock? Native American azaleas. Okay, that's the heritage of them. You can mix Rothschild in there too, but you got that blue blood from America, you see. These are deciduous, by the way. They are deciduous azaleas, which means they're probably a little bit ruggeder across the board than the others. Okay, she mentioned I was at Old Westbury Gardens. I served time there for 11 years. This is the mansion as you come up the drive, and you see large rhododendrons on the right and then one peaking on the extreme left. Long Island is a wonderful climate for these things because you're near the water, you have high humidity, which brings them through the winter in good shape. One of the things that happens to many of our native plants is that they were sent to or taken by plant explorers early on when they, after they discovered America, etc., things were taken back to Europe. And the people who were living beside the native ones, out in the forest back east someplace, didn't have any particular appreciation for them. But back there, they began to hybridize them with other things, and they came up with rhododendrons that are much hardier than the rhododendrons that come from Asia, which is where most of them come from. And when they came back again, they came back to us in this form. This is one of the groups of the hardiest, most ruggedest, and one of the earliest of these groups of hybrids introduced. These are the ironclads, and they're ironclad because that's the way they perform. And this is at the foot of the terrace, just below the house that you saw in the previous picture. No, this just happens to be this particular planting. We had a sort of a saying at Old Westbury Gardens and we had a board of directors, the chairman of which lived right beside us and was the daughter of the family whose place this was. And we had this saying among the gardeners that we could plant almost anything we liked as long as it was pink or white. A little blue mixed in. But anyway, the ladies had their tastes. How's this one? Couldn't you just see decorating cakes with those little buds before they open? Okay, that's mountain laurel, but I don't think you want to try it here. I could see places somewhere in the outer reaches of the wilds over here with a stream running down through the bottom on a north-facing slope where you had good humidity, where these would thrive. But the story about this one is the interesting thing. A professor at the University of Connecticut by the name of Dick Janes began to collect forms. He tramped through the wilds, the Appalachians all over, and he got ones with red flowers, ones with cinnamon flowers, ones with combinations of these things, etc. But they were extremely difficult to propagate and get out into the nursery so that people could buy them, because the only way you could succeed was to graft them. And grafting is slow and it's expensive. Okay, at one of the International Plant Propagators meetings one year, and I'm sure that Dick knew about this before, but a graduate student from the University of Wisconsin gave his report on his research was tissue culture, cloning, of mountain laurels, wherein he, with one bit of tissue, starting in a test tube, produced 10,000 plants of that in a year's time. Now, these were baby plants at that point. Dick Janes promptly resigned his professorship and started his nursery. But anyway, it's a lovely thing. There would be a few limited areas if you had just the right spot where these could be grown in, and they're all related to azaleas and rhododendrons. They're all members of the family Ericaceae. They love acid soil. Daphne, here's another one. Daphne, this is Burkwoodii, but there's one, Carol Markham, that has the edges of the leaves are white and also very fragrant. Daphnes are quite fragrant. Protected location, they should work in Fayetteville. Shrubs that probably, for the most part, the biggest sorts of them probably won't exceed 3 feet. And many more of them will be more in the 2-foot, 30-inch range. But the Daphnes. This one is Enchanthus. Enchanthus, this one is Perilotus, and I don't know of a common name for this. It's also a member of the same family with azaleas and rhododendrons. This is its winter color. This one is a short, maybe only 5 or 6 feet tall, about the same distance across, so it fits the typical landscape. The more common form, which I don't have a picture of, the so-called red vein Enchanthus, a different species, tends to grow 12 feet or so in height. And we usually can't, in the size of our properties today, use too many 12-foot shrubs. You may be able to use a 12-foot tree, but not too many 12-foot shrubs. The flowers are like this. This one actually is the red vein Enkianthus flower. The one that we showed you, the Perulatus, is a bit more white, doesn't have as much color in it. But where you can grow azaleas, you can grow these. And in fact, I see Susan has got 2 down by the post office steps of the red-veined one. Now let's get into some that may be just a little bit less exotic, the viburnums. If you are to ask me what I think probably the most versatile group of shrubs that is reliably hardy into the Midwest and all sorts of places, I probably would say the viburnums. And they range from these double-flowered forms that are often called snowball bush forms. This is the double form of the European so-called high bush cranberry, which it's really a viburnum, but we'll show you why they're called cranberry in a minute. These are actually sterile blossoms. When you see this sort of thing, it's sterile. But they range from this to this. This is a little more open and lacy, and when you see that, the center flowers are fertile here. It's only the larger petaled ones around the outside that are sterile. This is Tomentosa mariesii. This one has been considered by many people back east as a suitable substitute for the dogwood if the dogwood indeed, dies out or you can't plant it anymore. This will get quite large. It'll get 10 feet across and 8 feet tall and could be trained to a few stems, which would make it appear much more like it was a small tree as such. But a wide range in the viburnums. And most all of them have excellent fall color and berries. This is Wrightii. And what you will find with these things is that the birds will tend to eat what they like first. What they don't like as well, they're like a kid, give them a choice between a dish of spinach and a dish of ice cream. He's going to eat the ice cream first, and if he starves, he might eat the spinach later. Okay, well, birds are the same way. They leave the things they don't like as well until later on. Yeah.
Carl, could you tell us how fast some of these grow?
Most of the viburnums are quite rapidly growing. If you buy a small plant, within 3 years you're going to have a specimen in effect with most of them. So anyway, you get the attractive fruits. This is the so-called tea viburnum, Viburnum certigeum. There is a red berried form, which is the normal one. This has the orange fruits, and actually this is into summer yet, where they're displaying these. This is dilatatum, one of the most attractive to birds, and as you do see sometimes after a hot summer, you see a few sporadic flowers in the fall, so they just happen to be there along with the berries. But the viburnums, a whole range of them, some small forms, maybe 3.5, 4 feet, but many of them get up to being 6, 8 feet and even above that, so they're large shrubs. Here is the American high bush, or cranberry bush viburnum. It grows all through the north woods. And it's called cranberry bush because indeed you can use those berries and they taste just like cranberries. It is viburnum. You would ask me that. I don't think I can remember right now. But I probably remember when we finish. But anyway, it will usually be sold as the American cranberry bush viburnum to begin with. Viburnum. It'll come to me.
The woods, will they take shade? Or
they take shade, yeah. Any soil. It's not particular. This will grow 6 to 8 feet tall, and you get a good crop of berries, so you can grow your own cranberries, if you will. Let's look briefly at the hydrangeas. This is, by the way, the palm dome of the Enid A. Haupt Conservatory at the New York Botanic Garden, where I finished my career, or where my career finished me, one of the two. And this is the hydrangea arborescens. This is native in this area. I've seen it up around Eureka Springs growing out of cracks in the rock. And that in spite of the fact that the hydrangeas, the very word says they want water. This one you can cut back to the ground and it will still flower because it flowers on current season's wood rather than on buds formed the previous year. The problem with the one that we used to call the florist azalea, which is sold commonly in nurseries around here, is that the buds are formed in the fall, and if you get a severe winter, the buds are killed, and that's why it doesn't bloom that year. This one, maybe not the most attractive one of the lot, but it's rugged, and that one isn't going to come down. That's the big old PG that sticks way up in the air. This is the oak-leafed viburnum. This flowers start out white, but like many, or not viburnum, but hydrangea, and like many of the hydrangea flowers, in essence, they go from white to this pinkish color to ultimately to bronze. And yeah, some of you may remember when you were kids, your mom probably had in the parlor, if you go back far enough, had an arrangement of these for the winter on stems, stuck in some tall vase, as such, dried, and that was not uncommon.
Tell us a little more about the white one. What's the name on
The latest.
previous?
The previous one, that's arborescens. And the best variety there, if I remember correctly, is Annabelle. It's a little more floriferous. There are many of these things at this point. We really can't, cover them all. I wish we could, because there are some of them that have the same lacy type flower that we showed you on the viburnum that are just so delicate, and some of those will turn blue if you acidify the soil as such, so you can have blue ones, pink ones, white ones, etc., so that there's a wide range. This is the fall color on this one. So you get fall color as well as the flowers. Sumacs, well, we kind of we relegate these things to the roadsides because, there's plenty of them out there. Why do we want to put them in a garden? On the other hand, if you had a garden that was more of a naturalistic garden, they do fit, and they've probably got one of the nicest fall colors across the board of anything. There's even one species that you can use the berries to make lemonade with.
Oh, what kind is that, do you know?
I would have to remember, I think it's the smooth one,
Smooth.
but check with me. They're not going to poison you anyway. Try it.
Well, now, are some of them poisonous?
There is a so-called poison sumac, which the biggest one on Long Island had a trunk diameter of 8 inches and was out in a cranberry bog out by Riverhead, for those of you who know Long Island. But you won't mistake them. That one has leaves that are really more like poison ivy, which is its first cousin. This is probably Rus glabra, the so-called smooth one, at one of the loveliest gardens you will find anywhere, Wave Hill in the Bronx. It was a former estate. The former conductor of the NBC Symphony, Toscanini, lived there. Arturo lived there, yeah. Samuel Clemens, Mark Twain lived there. At one time it was housed the English ambassador to the United Nations. It's now a part of the New York Park System, and there is a horticulturist there who is without peer, and his name is Marco Polo Stefano.
Wow.
And with a name like that, how can you go wrong? But Marco, in this garden, has introduced the loveliest, most unusual things that you will ever see. And you see him written up in many publications as that, they credit him with having brought this to this country or made it available. And here in the middle of his garden, sumac. This is the shiny sumac, Rus coppolina, which has a shinier surface. This is the aromatic sumac, Rus aromatica, that's R-H-U-S. It has a spicy fragrance and makes a good low natural heads that you don't really have to trim. This is the Arnold Arboretum in Boston, Mass. It's a part of Harvard University. And this is, no trimming. This is just the hedge along the, I forget, I think there's a ravine or something just over the edge of that. It's just beginning to get its fall color. It will be much more orangish color than what you see there. Another group that are among my favorites are the cotoneasters. It's not cotoneaster, it's cotoneaster. Okay, and we're not going to show you a mess of these. There are a lot of them, but they range from creepers. Creep along the ground, you put them on top of a rock wall, and down they hang over the edge. There are tall ones that are pretty much upright, some that are sort of in between, like this one. The flowers are not terribly significant. The foliage is generally good. Most of them are semi-evergreen, if not evergreen, depending on where you're located. Most of them, the foliage will take a reddish cast in the fall, And almost all of them have lovely red berries, and I'm sure you can't see in this particular slide as such, that hang on well into the winter. It usually is at least January or February before the birds or somebody decides that, hey, I'm hungry enough, I'm going to eat them. It's a member of the rose family, related to apples and hawthorns and peaches and all these other things. Not as disease susceptible as many of the other rose family members, like roses themselves. But they're so diverse, they can be used in so many ways that you really need to investigate cotoneasters and see where they would fit in your landscape. Lilacs. This one is the Royal Botanical Garden in Hamilton, Ontario, and they have a very large collection of lilacs. It's one of the old-fashioned flowers. I've got one up in front, and we'll figure out how to give that away to somebody before we leave. I haven't quite decided how I'm going to do that, but anyway. Maybe it's the highest bidder, but anyway. But if you've lived in the north, you know that these are lovely when they flower. Don't have too much to offer at other times, but just the fragrance of those is all it takes. And as I grew up, I think probably most cosmetics that women used, probably a majority of them had the lilac fragrance.
They have heart-shaped leaves, though.
They do have heart-shaped leaves. The leaves tend to be prone to infestation by mildew in the summer. You have to decide whether you want to treat them or not. It isn't going to hurt the plant if you don't, but they may become unsightly. They have a penchant, however, for blooming, you know, you've heard of blackberry winter around here. They have a tendency to bloom just as that late freeze comes, and it may get them. If you go much further south, by the way, if you go on the other side of the mountains, you're too far south for these. They do have to have winter. And I've noticed here that in a cold winter, or after a cold winter, they bloom better in the spring than they do if you don't have a real cold winter. But we can grow them here. I brought with me, and this is a slip off of one, a bunch of seed from the collection of the New York Botanical Garden, and germinated them. And I've come up with some really beautiful ones, and they've done really quite well here. So you don't want to write them off. But if you're afraid that they're going to get frozen, you plant this one. This is the Hungarian lilac. Syringa josiki, G-O-S-I-K-A-E, or some such thing as that. It's broader. It doesn't tend to have the sort of ugly legs that you wish the skirt was a little longer on. And really flowers like mad. Now, the only thing is, you have that lovely sweet fragrance on the others. Have you ever smelled privet when it's in bloom? It kind of gets you. And privet and lilac are members of the same family, and this one smells like the privet. So you may want to put it sort of to the back corner someplace, not by the front door or the kitchen window. But anyway, the interesting thing about this is that there is, or was, a woman in Canada who hybridized this with the common lilacs and has come up with a strain of exceptionally hardy lilacs that will, you know, go way up into Canada and combine the best characteristics of the two of them. And if I could think of her name, I'd tell you the name of the group, but right now that slipped my mind. But in any case, they're lovely. And what's this, by the way? How many of you are familiar with this? I don't have any volunteers? How about a Japanese tree lilac, which flowers 2 weeks later yet, and will get to be a tree maybe 14, 15 feet tall. And if you trim it so you see the trunks as they mature get the same sort of appearance of that smooth cherry bark. How many have seen them around here? I got a bunch of them. I've given the Fayetteville parks several of them last year, and probably give them more at the end of the season. But this is in Fort Wayne, Indiana, and this is the tree lilac. Did somebody have a question?
Yeah, do they smell good?
They've been up high enough off the ground that without a ladder, I really haven't taken the time to smell them.
Close to 'em, huh?
I don't think it's outstanding, or you would smell it. So I think it's mostly, you know, for the effect. But they do flower. On Long Island, flower in June. So in other words, you're way past the freezing. Here's a favorite little shrub of mine, and it's kind of the coloration of it is not going to show as much here where the room can't be perfectly darkened as it would if you saw it up close. And this is commonly called blue mist, Caryopteris. Different than most people do as the ground cover on the slope coming down from the national headquarters of PepsiCo in Purchase, New York. First time I'd seen it used that way, and I love it. There are other color forms of it. They all have this sort of silvery foliage, which is attractive, and it's the right size to put in a perennial border, too, by the way. And they come into flower about, just after midsummer and flower till frost, when, you know, you really want things to come into flower, and you'd love to have some blue flowers at that time of year. It's a nice, cool color. And it is actually best treated as a perennial, where you cut it almost to the ground every year and let it come back fresh, because it doesn't inhibit its blooming, and that way the twigs and everything are all nice and you know, lively, fresh, etc. You don't have a lot of woody stuff there. But Caryopteris, 3 feet max. More often than not, and in a typical situation, it won't be more than about 30 inches. There's also one with a golden foliage, which I think looks as if it was chlorotic, had some nutrient problems, but anyway, I don't like that one. Here's another one that sort of fits the same category, Vitex agnus castana, or castana, called chaste tree. Now, I don't know, I didn't do the research on this, why it's called chaste tree. There may be another use for this back in the old days.
It's a women's, yeah, it's a women's. Vitex is very commonly used for premenopausal, menopausal.
I haven't experienced that problem myself, but
I was at
I knew it had some.
Walmart, and I think you can get chaste tree there, and you can read about it on the little bottle.
But I knew that it had to have some connection, or it wouldn't have had that name. But anyway, this is one that tends to get leggy. It also flowers in midsummer, when you really need shrubs that are flowering as such. So what I'd love to do with this one is to cut it back about 2 feet off the ground every year, and it comes back with new fresh foliage again. It'll still get up 4 or 5 feet tall and flower. So I handle it the same way as I would that blue mist or Caryopteris. And it comes in white, it comes in that darker color you saw before, and then also in this sort of medium color. But it's, and then the best one is by the Throg that I've ever seen is by the Throg's Neck Bridge, the Merchant Marine Academy there, growing just, you know, with a stone's throw from Long Island Sound. That's apparently ideal for it. Here's a native.
Mr. Totemeier, when you're cutting it back, are you cutting it back to the ground level nearly?
On the Vitex, I would cut back to about 2 feet or so, or 1.5 feet. On the Caryopteris, I'd even cut it back to about 6, 8 inches or thereabouts. And then just let them sprout back with new growth.
Thank you. In the fall?
Fall or early spring, depending on, you know, whether it's going to be more unsightly in the landscape in the winter, pruned back than it would be if you left it. This is fringe tree. Fringe tree or fringe shrub. It's a native of the Appalachian region, and it's related to sumac, by the way. And when they are in bloom, I mean, you know, it's just as if someone had spread whipped cream over the top of it, or meringue. There is a tree form of this from China that gets to be 30, 40 feet tall, but blooms the same way. But this one is very hardy. It's a big shrub. You could train it as a small tree by limiting the trunks, etc. But it really makes a showing. How many of you are familiar with this one? There are a few of them around here. It's the so-called red tip, or Photinia, which has been planted so much during in through the South that it's got all kinds of blight problems, etc. I've never seen one flower here. I think it probably is because most people tend to shear them too much. They've sheared the flowers off of them, or the buds. This is Callaway Gardens, but if allowed to flower, this is what it would look like. The problem with it primarily, again, is it's been overplanted in the deep South, and you know, whenever you get almost a monoculture of something, I used to say with rhododendrons on Long Island that no respectable rhododendron pest, you know, could fail to get from one end of Long Island just hopping from one leaf to the other on rhododendrons. So when you get that kind of a concentration, then you're probably going to have problems. There is a blight that affects it. It's lovely. The new growth is always bright red on it. There are other plants, by the way, that have that same characteristic, and I don't have a picture of it. You're familiar with Pieris, Andromeda. They're beginning to be planted around here more frequently, and there's some of those that the new growth will come out a creamy white, Some of them that'll come out various shades of sort of a pinkish red as such, and then the normal one is primarily green. But as the new growth matures, then it turns to its normal green color. Fathergilla. Whoops. Here, I did it myself. A couple of natives. There's a tall one that'll grow about 5 feet tall. There's a shorter one that probably won't get more than 3 feet tall. Have these bottle brush type flowers, usually sort of mid to late spring. And the fall color, however, is wonderful on these. They will take on an almost orange color, sort of a combination of gold and orange. So Fathergilla, F-O-T-H-E-R-G-I-L-L-A. It's a good native from the Appalachian region. If you want something that's going to flower all summer, Potentillas. 3 feet tall or less. They're actually the members of the rose family. They range in color from white through shades of very pale yellow on through deep golden yellow, such as this, to red. And they come in flower, about the 1st of June or thereabouts, maybe a little earlier here. I haven't seen that many of them around here. But they literally flower all season long. And there are other things that do this. Some of the mid-sized, they're 3 feet tall or so, and actually some of the dwarf too, the spireas at this point, will continue to flower all season long. And with those, you don't really have to deadhead most of the spireas because the new flowers each time come up just above the old ones and tend to hide the old ones. And all you have to do really is then trim them in the spring to get rid of the old stuff. So that there are a lot of plants, much more than we really tend to think of, that will be good all through most of the season as such. Bottle brush buckeye. Any of you ever come up with this, against this little rascal? Okay, this one is probably, well, I don't know how old it is, probably when this picture was taken 75 years old or so, and it was probably about 50 feet across. It keeps moving. There's one within a half mile or less of this in an old nursery on Long Island that last time I heard it measured was something like 125 feet across. The moral to this story is you don't plant one of these in the middle of a quarter-acre backyard. Unless you're going to put your house on the next lot. But it has the leaves of a typical buckeye or horse chestnut, and then these plumes that come up, as you see there. So basically, I guess what we're saying there is that there are some shrubs that in other words, watch what you put and where you put it, because some of them just don't fit. This is one of my favorite ground covers, about 16, 18 inches tall, Skimmia japonica, flowering with Tulipa tarda, also called Tulipa daisy-carpum, which is one of the species tulips that flowers 2 or 3 weeks ahead of the hybrid tulips. Those flower heads that you see there will become clusters of bright red berries, just about like the ones on holly. Except for the fact that you know the old story about taking two to tango. There are male and female plants. So what you do is to hide that poor male in the background someplace where you can't see that he doesn't have berries as such. But lovely evergreen foliage, and then the berries you see are on there. Usually you'll find some of them when it's flowering in the spring. Some of them still on there. And that should do well here. Shade, by the way. That's a shade plant. You put Skimmia japonica, and you put it in the shade with lots of organic matter, mulch around it, etc., and it's happy. Roses. I'm not going to say much about roses because you know about roses. This is Chicago Botanical Garden. The hybrid teas, the floribundas, the modern roses, as you know, really require a lot of care. They're disease prone. On the other hand, the old shrub roses had the problem of not only really, most of them only flowered in June. So, you know, they may have had attractive fruits and so forth, but people went to the others. But they tended to be very resistant. You didn't have to spray them or do anything with them more than you did any other shrub. They've come back now, and they've not only come back but as they originally were, but come back in hybridized forms. The David Austin group of roses, for example, are hybridized with other species to the point where they still have the disease-resistant by and large, but they will now flower through the season, just as the modern roses. So many, many people, even some of the Rose Society people that I've had the opportunity to talk with, are moving more toward this so-called shrub roses than these. And, you know, there really isn't anything nicer than a rose. This is the entrance to Parody's Plantation in Cape Cod, Massachusetts, in Sandwich. If you go there, there are 3 museums in a garden setting. The garden is extremely well maintained. One museum is an old Shaker barn that has a collection of antique cars, including a Duesenberg valued at almost $500,000. There's an old Revolutionary War blockhouse with a collection of antique you know, rifles and so forth dating back to the Revolutionary War. There is an art museum with both primitive and modern art in it. And in the lobby is one of the old hand-carved carousels, and if you pay your admission at the gate, you can ride that as much as you want. I will admit I've ridden it several times. Some now, just a few for berries, and we'll just be about done here. This is the common beauty berry. People who do flower arrangements like to use this. The shrub is not particularly attractive during the summer. It basically is a full sun plant. It goes about 6 feet tall, but in the fall, this is what you get. And here is its white-berried form. On Long Island, we found the birds preferred the white, and you just didn't have the berries when fall came, and they dropped their leaves. But planted primarily with their berries. Here's one primarily for its fall color. This is Euonymus elatus, the so-called burning bush. Little concern about this one when Lady Bird came up with her beautification program for highways. What the people did was plant all these exotic shrubs along the highways that if you have in the backyard, you have to take care of them. Well, nobody took care of them, except that this is the one that survived, and now it's beginning to seed and come up all over the place so that people are a little concerned about it. But in any case, it will give you a riot of fall color, and you'll get it will do well in shade, but you get the best color in sun. Here's one, and quite a few of these around here. High bush blueberry. Fall color on blueberries. Quite respectable. If you drive on 412, old 412 or the new one, either one, and you come between here and Tulsa, and you come to a sort of a dip, maybe there's a stream there, maybe just a place that's sort of a wet spot alongside the road, and you'll see these berries every fall. Ilex verticillata, one of the deciduous hollies. And the berries, if you get a holly that the birds like, you'll never enjoy the berries. If you get a holly that they don't like, they'll stay on through most of the winter until, again, the birds are starved enough to eat them. And what usually clears them off in the spring is the cedar waxwings coming back through. They'll wipe them out. This is Aronia. It's, again, a relative of plums and prunes and so forth, and apricots and all those things. Grow about 6 feet tall. Has these lovely red fruits on it in the fall. They're about ½ an inch across. This is one called Brilliantissima. You want to know what the original one looks like? See the green leaves across the bottom? Okay, this is one selected for its fall color. Aronia Brilliantissima. An upside-down picture of Rosa rugosa, rose hips. This is, again, one of the benefits of many of the shrub roses, is that they do have attractive fruits that can be enjoyed into the fall. Also, those of you who are into such things, the rose hips have about as high a vitamin C content as anything you will find. There are some exceptions from the tropical rainforest, and people use them in rose hip tea, etc. But this is one of the, as I say, one of the benefits of some of the shrub roses. Oregon grape holly, Mahonia aquifolium. The aquifolium part comes because the foliage looks as if it's holly foliage. And it has yellow flowers in the spring, purple fruits that are cut like little clusters of grapes, but primarily, in other words, a medium height, 3 to 4 foot tall evergreen shrub that will be attractive in most winters all the way through the winter, particularly if it gets just a little shade. There's another Mahonia belii, which is a more southern type, which has a sort of a bluish tint to its foliage and does have big clusters of purple fruits that are quite attractive. But broadleaf evergreen. This one, you wouldn't write home to Mom about this particular picture, except for the fact that if you knew that that was taken before the day before Thanksgiving one year on Long Island, you see that that thing has been flowering right up to the bitter end. This is Abelia grandiflora. Fairly common in the area, probably should be planted more. There are dwarf forms related to it as such. But once it starts flowering again, usually around the 1st of June, you'll have flowers all season long on it. And that's, I think, an advantage. But that literally was taken the day before Thanksgiving. The hollies, we're not going to say much about hollies. Here's one that is unusual. This is Ilex pedunculosa. This is the office and laboratory building at the Arnold Arboretum of Harvard University in Jamaica Plain, Massachusetts. I don't know why they put the lonely male up there in front of the building and put the others sort of around the corner, because the male, as you see, does not have fruits on it, when the females are quite fertile. And it's called pedunculosa because of this. The fruits are on a long peduncle or stem, and a common name very often is the cherry holly, because they're on stems like cherry. But there are so many hollies. Hollies do well here. Whether it's some of the dwarf types or the Japanese ilex, which lend themselves to edgings and little hedges and this sort of thing, or whether it's some of the taller ones such as foster eye here, takes off. And you know, I've seen houses in Springdale where you could hardly see the house because they'd planted 3 or 4 of them across the front. So hollies do well and should not be overlooked. And this is one of the nicest ones. I would plant this one in a very protected location, however, if you are planting it around here. Just quickly, other uses of evergreen shrubs. These are junipers. This is the National Herb Garden at the National Arboretum in the northeast corner of Washington, D.C. And I think these are, as I say, all junipers there, although the English ivy is also trained and trimmed as if it were a hedge or an edging. So those are things you can do with them. You can